Oh, goody.
All right, what's going on, everybody? Zombies here again, and today we're back with another Mercenaries video. Today is another episode of Meta Monday, where we take a look at the current Mercenaries meta, get a peek behind the curtain at the data we have available, and see how things are currently playing out in the developing metagame. So we're going to get right on into talking about the meta. Before we do, if you enjoy this type of content, do remember to like and subscribe. It's a ton to help out the channel and keeps the Mercenaries videos coming. Yeah, let's get right on into Meta Monday number 13. This is going to be one of, if not our last Meta Mondays of this current meta before we get new content, kind of closing it out for the Sunken City. We might take one more look at it just before we get new content, probably early October, about a month from now or so. But this should give us a pretty good idea of where we're standing at. This is the first time we're taking a look at the meta post Cthulhu release, as well as some of the recent buffs we got in the last patch. So first thing we're looking at here is the top 10%. Now, there are always going to be less comps here at the beginning of the month, as there's just less data, so not really surprising there. However, the ones that are showcased here, I do think are very representative of what's going on in the current environment. So at top 10%, we have the Old Gods comp with Yasharaj, Yogg, N'Zoth, Vol'jin, Maestrik, Cthulhu. That one is by far the most popular comp played right now at the higher MMR bracket. 610 games coming in at just under 62% win rate. Really strong comp. I think Cthulhu has overperformed a lot of people's expectations. I know he definitely did better than what I was expecting, and definitely seems to have a very solid place in the current metagame, especially dealing with some of those bigger late game threats like Longjin and Sylvanas. Next up, we have the Arcane comp. So we have Nefarian Trigor Reno with a Karen Tyrande Longjin bench. This one is coming in at 310 games, and kind of surprisingly, not that great of a win rate, 47.8% in this higher MMR bracket. This could be because it's possible maybe Reno isn't the best version of this deck. Maybe the Valera version is better, or one of the new ones with beasts that got buffed and such. We'll have to see, but it is definitely a solid version of the comp. It just seems that in the current environment, it has a hard time competing with a lot of the other top comps. So was definitely a little bit surprised to see that because it's pretty rare for some of the better comps to be under 50% win rate. But it seems the metagame is kind of hostile towards this version of Arcane at the moment. Next up is the Nagas, and these are some stats that really surprised me. So I think Nagas has actually become one of the more popular builds. Obviously, Old Gods is a lot more popular, but I think that's just because it's fun and it's new and the characters are very iconic. But we have Elise Ashara Reno with the Bane Vosh Athissa bench. 300 games, so just a little bit under the Arcane comp, but the win rate here is absolutely staggering, and this is not something we have seen too often in the Mercenaries meta history. Almost 60 or almost 76% win rate. That is insane. Obviously, the sample size is a little bit lower, but 300 games is nothing to scoff at, and this is just kind of insane. I really can't remember a top comp off the top of my head that was anywhere near this high of a win rate. I'm not really sure why this is the case. If I had to take a guess, I would say it's because I think the double reds really give you a lot of game against things like Sylvanas and Cthulhu, which are both very popular right now, and it's not terrible into Arcane either. So it just seems really good, and on top of that, it's also just a lot of fun. So my personal recommendation, I would be playing this comp right now. I think it's a ton of fun, and it's putting up some truly staggering numbers right now in the higher MMR bracket. And then the last comp we have here in the top 10% is the Kazakus Yasharaj Vol'jin Ashara Maestra Sylvanas. So this is our shadow representation. Looks like the Maestra version is the most popular one at the higher MMR bracket right now. That one's coming in at 250 games with a 53.1% win rate. Shadow, definitely still a really strong comp, but I think they do have a bit of trouble dealing with things like Cthulhu. And on top of that, I think this is also more of an indication of people have played a whole ton of Shadow. It's been out for a while, and I think people just want to try other stuff. The Old Gods comp and the Naga comp are much more recent additions relatively, as they were not really discovered, or in the Old Gods case, not really fully available until more recently. So kind of unsurprising that people are saying, hey, I've played with Shadow a lot, I kind of want to move on to something else. So I think that is a bigger reason why it has a lesser amount of games. It's still really, really powerful and a core part of the meta. And all these stats are from about the past week, going from August 30th to today, September 5th. Now we're going to take a look at the top 20%, as that provides a little bit more variety in terms of what we can look at here, but still generally the same thing seems to be true. With the comps we see at the top 10% also performing very well in this bracket here. So here we can see the most popular comp, still Old Gods here, coming in at just over 60% win rate with 740 games. So a little bit more played there, but exact same one we were just looking at before. Really, really strong, unsurprisingly, that it is at the top. People really like trying out the Old Gods and using those cool diamond portraits from the events. Then the Naga comp still having a pretty staggering win rate here, just under 68% at 530 games. This also continues to show that these two are just the more popular, and looking at these numbers, two of the stronger comps available out there right now. Then we see yet again the Arcane comp continuing to put up kind of a mediocre showcase. Now, one thing that is interesting here is we do have two versions of Arcane in the top 20%. We have the one we just saw previously that was also in the top 10%. However, here it is doing just under 500 games at a 48.5% win rate. Worth noting, this version is running the healing equipment on Nefarian, so whenever one of your dragons dies, Nefarian gets healed. I thought that was kind of interesting. Never really been an equipment I thought was the most optimal in this build, but apparently a lot of people are playing with it. And then the version we have down below here has my preferred equipment, the extra attack on all your dragons, including Nefarian himself. That does seem to have given it a little bit of a boost in win rate, but nothing too crazy. Only about a little bit under 2% boost, going up to 50.2% win rate over 270 games. Definitely seems to be the less popular version of the comp though, having almost half as many games as the healing dragon equipment. Really kind of surprised to see Arcane be putting up such low win rate percentage, but I guess it would seem that this meta is just a bit more hostile to it than I initially thought. Then we see Shadow here, the more popular version of Shadow at this bracket is actually one that has Cookie in place of Maestra. So we got Yasharaj Kazakus Vol'jin, Shara Cookie Sylvanas. This one definitely bolstering a higher win rate than the Maestra version. I think that makes a lot of sense. Maestra's not bad. I do think the Cookie version is the better version of the comp right now. This one's coming in at 62.7% win rate over 290 games. Then we have the other version of Shadow, Kazakus Yasharaj Vol'jin, Ashara Maestra Sylvanas, coming in at 54.4% win rate over 270 games. So we can see there's a pretty significant difference in terms of performance there. That's almost 8% win rate difference, so that is that's pretty significant, honestly, all things considered. I do think that makes sense, though. I think Maestra's cool and can be powerful, but she also just kind of dies rather quickly a lot of the time. And I think it's more important to have a bit more resilience on the bench, and that extra cookie HP can sometimes be very relevant. And the last comp we have here is one that's been making a little bit of a resurgence, and it's kind of a different take on the big pirates. This one runs Elise, Trigor, Eudora with Maestra Edwin Sneed on the bench. You're getting Eudora to swap out for your Maestra, so then you have the full bench of the big pirates, which have been good for quite some time. This one's coming in at 63% win rate over 250 games. So these are all the comps in the top 20% right now. Little bit different than the ones we saw at top 10%, but overall, I think it paints a very similar picture. Just gives a little bit more insight into some of the alternate versions of some of these popular comps like Arcane and Shadow. Now, let us take a look at our graph here. So, this one, it's a pretty unsurprising result of the metagame to me overall. Like I said before, Cthulhu, the Old Gods, really just taking up a huge metagame percentage right now, coming in at 740 games, 26.1% of the meta. Again, these are HS replay data stats from the 30th of August to the 5th of September in top 20%. And yeah, it's just, the comp's really strong. The only downside about Old Gods right now is, unfortunately, the mirror is kind of silly because it turns into kind of a coin flip fiesta, whoever gets their kind of Old God ultimates off first. So I don't think that makes for the best, most interesting gameplay, to say the least. But I do think it will be a little bit better once we get more new characters and you see less of these mirror matches. Then we have the Naga comp coming in at also a very, very large metagame share percentage here. Elise, Ashara, Reno, Bane, Vosh, Athissa, 530 games, 18.7% metagame share. So just the Old Gods and the Nagas alone are getting close to half of the representation on top 20% of ladder right now, which is kind of crazy. Although, like I said, it kind of makes sense given that both of these comps were a little bit later discoveries relative to a lot of the other comps out there. And I think a lot of players, myself included, are just kind of ready for the next drop, where the meta's not really bad compared to a lot of past Mercenaries metas. I think it's just a little bit stale and people want something new and refreshing to shake it up, so they're not seeing the same handful of comps over and over again. And both those comps are kind of the most recent additions that are very, very powerful, and on top of that, pretty fun to play. Then we have the healing version of Arcane, so Nefarian with the healing equipment, Trigor, Reno, Karen, Tyrande, Longjin, 490 games, 17.3% metagame share, so almost as popular as the Nagas, though the Nagas just seem to be performing so much better. It's really night and day. Before I looked at the data, I really thought Arcane would have been doing better, but it seems between Old Gods and Nagas, they're just not having as good of a time as they used to, especially this version with Nefarian with the healing equipment. Again, my personal preference, I like the attack one better, and the stats do seem to, at least for now, back up that it does have a little bit more of an edge, but even then, really not quite as impressive as it used to be. Then we have the Shadow with Cookie, Yasharaj, Kazakis, Vol'jin, Ashara, Cookie, Sylvanas, coming in at 290 games and 10.2% of the metagame share. Yeah, I mean, what's there to say about Shadow that hasn't already been said? I think the biggest thing to note about the Shadow comp is that despite the initial early turns playing very similarly, I do think it is actually one of the higher skill cap comps in the game, where a lot of players do not play it anywhere close to perfectly, and I think a lot of people either don't realize that or don't care to learn it, because I think it would be performing a lot better if that wasn't the case. But it's kind of understandable. Shadow been very, very dominant since the introduction of Yasharaj, and like I said before, people just kind of want new stuff. They know how Shadow goes, and most of the Shadow players, I think, have mostly gotten their fill of it by this point and are opting to try something newer like the Old Gods or Nagas. We have the plus attack version of Arcane with Neff, Trigor, Reno, Karen, Tyrone, DeLongjin coming in at 270 games and 9.5% of the metagame share. So just under or just over half of the representation of the other Arcane comp. If we did kind of throw these two together, they would actually be making up about a quarter of the metagame, so about a similar amount of Old Gods. And given that the only change here is in the one equipment, I think that does show that Arcane is still very popular, even if it is not performing quite as well as it used to. And then we have the Yasharaj, Kazakis, Vol'jin, Ashara, Maestra, Sylvanas version of Shadow. This one is coming in at 270 games and 9.5% of the metagame share. This one definitely feels like a little bit more of a hyper-aggressive, kind of glass cannon-y version of the build compared to the Cookie version, which I think is a little bit more focused on survivability. I personally prefer the Cookie version. I think it has a bit better other matchups. Surprisingly, the Lich King one seems to have really dropped off, but that could have to do with the rise of Nagas, making the red on the bench a little bit less impactful than it used to be. However, I do think he is a pretty decent choice against Cthulhu, which is also very popular right now. But the Master version, by no means bad, just a bit more fragile and hyper aggressive. And then our last comp here, the kind of big pirates with Maestra, Elise, Trigor, Eudora, Maestra, Edwin, and Sneed, coming in at 250 games and 8.8% of the metagame share. This one, I have seen it on ladder a few times around just before the season ended, and it seemed to be doing all right. I don't know if it's better than the other version of Big Pirates without Trigor. I think it's kind of interesting that a lot of the Big Pirates and the big human comps have kind of fallen off, at least in terms of the data, but I do still see them pretty regularly on ladder, and they do still feel pretty good. But again, that was kind of those were compositions that were found quite some time ago. So it could also be a case of people just having played their fill of them and just wanting to try out other stuff right now, especially at the start of the season climb. Definitely seems that there is less interest right now in the format, unsurprisingly, as we are all just waiting for that new content to kind of shake things up. The last Mercenaries update, where we got our big drop, really changed everything. Like, if we look at all the comps here, there's really no comp here without new characters, and it really completely changed the game in a way that none of the smaller comps really had, or none of the smaller drops really had a similar impact, because they were just smaller amounts of characters, and often if one of the characters was busted, it was usually only one or two of them, so you really didn't have as much diverse experimentation and totally new comps coming about. So I'm really excited to see what the new drop is going to hold and what it's going to do. Again, we don't have any official word on that, but looking at the kind of history of how these patches have normally come out, I would expect that 24.4 patch with the mini set and the Mercs drop is going to be coming out in about a month's time. We'll probably get a small little announcement at the end of September or on the 1st of 2nd of October, and then a few days later, it will most likely release. Very curious to see if they're going to do any reveal stuff like they did last time. I know Alkali teased some stuff in the Discord, and we actually had a fellow Mercs creator, Old Guardian, get to reveal the Nagas, which was really cool. So I'll keep you posted on all of that as we get more information. There's a chance we will take one final look at this kind of Sunken City drop meta just a little bit closer towards the end of the month to see where things really shake out just before we get the new characters and presumably a new meta. But that is going to wrap it up for this episode of Meta Monday number 13. Definitely let me know what you think in the comments. How are you liking the meta? Are you feeling like we really need some new stuff? Do you think the time between releases is too long? Or is it just right? Is it too short? Let me know what you think, what you're enjoying. If you enjoyed it, do remember to like and subscribe, and I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.